I'm going to ask what I think is probably an impossible question, but I'm going to try anyway and see where we go. I'm real curious about the long-term disruptive effects, or the potential long-term disruptive effects of this war in Ukraine. We've touched on some of them, but I'm thinking of things in terms of energy security, geopolitical boundaries and alliances, things like currency. And the rise and fall of Bitcoin, the nature of war. I think after the U.S. experience in the Middle East, we thought that the nature of war was changing to something that was more urban and fought with drones. But here we are. The Ukrainians are fighting a traditional a land war in their own country. So, is it possible to look forward 5 years and say and identify some of the permanent changes that are a result of this conflict?
And let me just add my addendum is it could be disruptive, they could be salutary.
Right.
Point.
Right. And that's a great addendum, because I would say on the energy security front, I think the big picture is that this is probably going to expedite the energy transition that we were talking about. I think Europe in particular is going to be front and center. And I think that we're going to see a much more commitment to moving off of, or expediting, I should say, the transition from the natural gas to the alternatives, especially in Europe. Question mark may be where nuclear fits into that, but we'll have to wait and see on that front. So I think that could be a salutary impact in terms of the broad view. I think that one of this war has really highlighted, though, is not just the primary impacts, but the secondary impacts. And you mentioned food issues. Obviously, this is really showing how Africa and other parts of the world really take the brunt of a lot of these wars that are taking place in other parts of the world. And we don't really recognize that. And that's going to be a longstanding challenge that we're going to have to address. So sort of the knock-on effects, not just of solving for the wheat shortage in Europe, but also dealing with the longer term downstream issues in other markets across the globe. So I think this is underscoring that globalization, while it's taken a lot of knocks and there are a lot of different national interpretations of what globalization means, there's no denying that that there are dimensions of globalization going on here that we need to address. The nature of war, I would argue that Ukraine, in many ways, has been an aberration in a lot of senses, because it is a hot war in the middle of Europe, and we haven't seen this since World War II. I don't see many of those replicating themselves based on this. But what I do think is we're going to be in store for a long-term competitive relationship between great powers that are going to use all instruments of influence. So information, obviously, we're seeing energy, economics, high tech, all of these things are going to be instruments of a competitive nature. And so a big challenge, I think, coming out of this is in the high tech space. Was one of the real interesting dynamics in the economic war waged with Russia is that the United States has come up with a novel item of embargoing technologies that use software designed in the United States. Semiconductors, for example. We're not manufacturing a lot of semiconductors, but they're using our patents and our designs. That's opening up a whole new space for how to think about high-tech competition. And I think that's going to be the next frontier in competition, especially with China moving forward. And so stay tuned on that. We're already seeing that discussion between the United States and the EU manifesting itself. On the financial side, yeah, I think we are in a world where it's a little terra incognito here. We've exacted these punishing financial sanctions, but again, we don't know what's part of policy, or the reaction that's part of policy, or part of de-risking that's autonomous of the policy. And is that de-risking going to also lead to other countries to realize that they need to have other kinds of currencies that they rely on? And here I would not be so concerned about Bitcoin, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin has to, come above ground, and there has to be a there, and central banks are trying to work those issues, even the Treasury Department's working those issues. But I do think years prior to this, we were seeing an ebbing of the dollar's role, and I would argue this unprecedented leveraging of the dollar is going to downstream lead to other countries to think about diversifying their currencies and their trading so that they're not as dependent. And here I would say the euro may be the bigger challenge here. So again, it's going to be putting more pressure on rethinking our partnership with our allies, first and foremost, in the 21st century, so that we're on the same page in high tech and financial issues that are increasingly interdependent. And to deal with those downstream effects, like countries in Africa and others who are outside of the main event, if you will, of these financial and economic trade wars that are taking place between the United States and Russia, or the West and the East, or